The second part of the conversation is self-interest. Self-interest is something that in community organizing is very, very important. What it means is there are different types of interest when a person is getting involved. There are people who are interested in the project because of personal reasons, which doesn't mean self-interest, right? I've recruited people who come to the organization and then they're selling Tupperware or Avon to the other people in the campaign, and they just wanted to get in to do that. That is not a self-interest, okay? That's a personal interest. A self-interest is a reason that the person has internally that will motivate them to be involved in the campaign. And it's usually the impact in their lives. So if I'm meeting with people that are impacted by the issue that I'm talking about, the chances of them getting involved and staying involved are much higher. So it's not about being right or wrong, by the way. I met with a parent, Gilberto, once, who told me, I want to get involved in this campaign because I am really interested in becoming a leader in my community and run for school board in the future. I was like, great. So everything I'm going to do is going to be sure to give Gilberto that experience for him to learn more about how to do that in his community. Gilberto is one of the most transformational people I've ever worked with because he actually organized me all the time. He was also always asking me for more, right? So I knew his self-interest was to run for office. He hasn't yet, but I check in on him all the time. And he often says that. He often says, these are the things you are teaching me to run for office in the future. Help them get there. So what I mean by that is ask open-ended questions and listen. When we were doing this exercise earlier about listening, actively listening offline, for those who are online, you weren't participating on that one. But a really cool thing about that exercise is that it allows you for you to listen, right, uninterrupted. But asking open-ended questions are the best way to get there. My open-ended question was for you to just start statements with I am, right? That was the best way to get you not to say yes or no, right? So can anybody give me examples of open-ended questions you could ask in a conversation to learn more about the person's self-interest? Anybody has examples? How do you ask open-ended questions to get to the person's self-interest? Any examples? Yes. Let's get the mic there. We're going to go to this side because this side has been quiet over there. So next time. Yeah.
So an open-ended question is one that has to go and it's going to give you the person that you're asking has to go and answer in a full sentence. So
Yeah.
I might go and say, so, how was your trip coming from Mexico when you came?
Great. So tell me more about how you got here from Mexico, right? That's a great example, right? When I shared earlier that I'm here from Mexico, people usually say, where are you from Mexico, right? Where are you from in Mexico? But one question I never say is, how do you get here, right? Tell me more about the experience of getting here. There's so much about that, right? Like, for example, the privilege that my father worked here in the 80s, and that's why he applied for a visa that allowed me to come to the country legally, right? Or with documents. That is a very different scenario than that of my cousin, right? That had to come to the country when he was very young. So there is a different story for all of us. But asking the person, how do you get here? It's a very, very powerful question. Any other in this side? Any other examples of open-ended questions for a one-on-one? You can do it. Yes. Can we get the mic with them? Thank you so much. What is the question?
I think in that occasion, like in a coffee shop, you can ask like, what's your favorite coffee or what's your favorite food?
That's a great one on the relationship building, right? Like, what is your order of food? Have you been here before? What is your favorite thing, right? I sometimes ask people, for example, whatever is happening. If I was meeting tonight with someone and the World Series are happening, then I will be asking, do you like baseball, right? Are you watching it or not, or stuff like that, right? But later in the self-interest, one question that we always want to ask people is, why do you decide to meet with me today? That's a very important question. Because people taking time away from their day to meet with you, it's a very big deal, okay? You shouldn't take it lightly. It's a huge privilege that people are giving you their time. So I always ask them, why do you decide to meet with me today? That is the way that I find out more about their interest. Well, because I wanted to learn more about this campaign, or because I wanted to learn more about the work you're doing, or because I wanted to share more about X or Y. One more example here in the middle. One more example of an open-ended question. Let's go here with the gentleman with the hat about shirt.
Thank you. Once you know their self-interest, I found it really effective to ask, I really admire what you do. What can I do to help you?
That's a great question. What can I do to help you? But first, you got to find out what is happening in their lives, right? So in the self-interest part, you might say, what is the biggest concern you have right now? Let me give you an example about this. This is going to sound a little ridiculous, but right after the election last year, I had a one-on-one with someone. And when I said, what is your biggest concern right now? She said something that really broke my heart. And she said, right after the current president got elected, my son asked me, by the way, she's a Mexican immigrant. Both her and her son are here as immigrants from Mexico. And she said, will the same thing that happened to Jewish people happen to us, Mom? When she said that to me, it was the most heartbreaking thing someone has ever told me, because I was like, how could you fathom that? How is that in your imagination, right? But it wasn't the kid's imagination. So my comeback to that was, how did that make you feel? Tell me more. When she started telling me about that, she started choking up, I started choking up, and the conversation became a lot more about the things that we could do together to fight back, right? Because it was an open-ended question. It was something about learning more about the person. She is now really involved in local campaigns in Nevada and doing a lot more work to fight back. The last one is ask about power. So explore their understanding of power. What I mean by that is, how do you do to make sure that the person understands who is in charge to make decisions? So I'm going to share an example of that. Sometimes we, mostly educated people or people who have some experience with advocacy, community organizing, or social change, we understand the structure of power. What's happened to me in the past is that I assume that the other person understands power, and we keep talking, and the person just doesn't know how to move forward, right? We're going to see an example of that on the next part of the video, about how can the person, does the person understand power?
I'd really like to get to know you a little bit better and tell you about this organization, Boston Educators for Social Justice, that I work with, because I think there might be some interest there. When did you start caring about public education?
I feel like I've really always cared about education for a long time.
So since you were little, since you were young?
Yeah, so both my parents are immigrants, and my mom always told me that they came to this country so that I could get a good education. So she really made me take it seriously.
Yeah, both of my parents are actually immigrants too, from India. Where did your parents immigrate from?
So my dad came from Bulgaria, and my mom was born in Tunisia, and they both met in France, and then I was born in New York.
Yeah, my parents kind of sent a similar message to me. In India, education is really important. I had this one really good teacher in 3rd grade named Mrs. Leadham, who was kind of the one teacher that made me feel really creative and heard. Did you have good teachers in your school experience?
There are a few that stand out. One for me is definitely Mr. Alexander in 8th grade, who taught English and always affirmed my writing. He was really cool, and he was just a really fun teacher too.
Sarah told me you got interested in education when you were in Philly, but it sounds like you had a good experience. When did you get interested?
They closed 24 public schools in Philly a few years ago when I was there, because they said that there wasn't enough money for public education in the city. And I volunteered for a community organization and actually got to know a lot of public school students, and they would tell me that in their schools they didn't even have enough books, they didn't have nurses or guidance counselors because of all the budget cuts. So I was like, wow, how is that possible that, I went to good public schools where we had everything we needed, and yet these students in Philly didn't have access to the most basic things.
I'm wondering why it mattered to you so much what was going on in Philly, if your own experience was a good one.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like I said, I think it really comes from what my mom used to teach me. Education is really important. Everybody should be able to have access to a good education. So I think it's not fair that some people get to have it and a lot of people don't.
I've actually gotten involved with Boston Educators for Social Justice because they're doing a lot of the work, like it sounds what was happening in Philly, trying to really get students the support that they need. So we actually are having this big training for our group on Friday, November 10th at 6 p.m. I think it sounds like it's something you would really enjoy, Jeff. Do you think you'd be able to make it that Friday?
That sounds interesting, but I'm really busy with school right now. I have papers, I have to study.
So one really cool thing about this example is that she already was part of an organization. She was part already of a campaign that wanted to advance things, right? So she was easy to connect, right? Sometimes we're trying to formulate that campaign. We're trying to formulate and connect people to their work. But hopefully when you're having a one-on-one, you have a clear goal. But in this case, she has a goal, and she's going to get to it on the ask. What do you think she did well in the one-on-one, in this part of like finding the person's self-interest? Did she find what the person is interested on? What was that example of self-interest?
Well, education.
Yeah. Tell me more about it. How did she do that?
What she did was she kept probing.
Can you use the mic? Thank you. Yeah.
She kept probing.
How?
She kept coming back, returning all the time to why Philadelphia when you had a good education? Why does it matter to you that this is happening in Philadelphia? She kept linking it back to what his core values were.
Yeah. And she shared a little bit about her own experience, right? She said, my parents in India value a lot of education. I wonder why. So she asked her own experience to ask more questions and open up the conversation, right? So there was a lot of vulnerability, as I was saying before, to allow for proximity in the conversation. What else? What other examples can you share about something that she did well on the one-on-one, here in the middle? Any examples of things that she did well in the conversation? Do you have any examples?
Along those lines, she started giving in prompts ways that he could go with it. So he'd said that he didn't know where he got it from, and she brought up her teacher as a way of probing towards a teacher that he might have had, or things that grew up in his experience.
That's right. She gave him a prompt. She helped him get there, right? As we were saying earlier, she helped him get there by giving him prompts, right? So she could have said whatever, right? She could have said your doctor or your neighbor, but she was talking about education. She wanted to center the conversation there. That was a very smart example. And by the way, this was done by volunteers. So please give those actors a round of applause because that was great. The last part, I'm going to go fast because we're actually going to practice an ask. It's to make an ask, the last piece, right? So we talked about the first 10% was to do what? By the way, the first 10% is to do what? I didn't hear you? Relationship building. The first part of the 10% of the conversation, relationship building. What is your favorite coffee? What do you like to order here, right? The second part, the 70%, it's called what? The self-interest. Try to find the person's self-interest by asking open-ended questions and getting to the root, right, of what are the concerns of the person and the motivation.